Bicton is the kind of Perth suburb where nothing happens. Quiet streets, tidy gardens, neighbors who've known each other for decades. It's where Colleen Rebelo raised 4 children, became a grandmother, and built a life people would later describe, simply, as warm. Her son, Andre Rebelo, told a different story online. A curated world of success, the look of a man who'd made it big trading cryptocurrency, who had nothing left to prove. The reality, hidden behind every post, was a debt approaching 6 figures. On the 13th of May 2020, those two worlds collided. Colleen Rebelo was found dead in her own bathroom. The shower was still running. Her body had been left as though she'd simply collapsed. To understand what was lost on the 13th of May 2020, you have to understand who Colleen Rebelo actually was. Not the woman whose death would become a headline, but the woman her children grew up with. Colleen was 58 years old, and her entire life was built around family. 4 children, Julian, the eldest, twins Andre and Monique, and Fabian, the youngest, still living at home with her in Bicton. Those who knew Colleen describe a woman defined by warmth and optimism, the kind of person who showed up, who remembered birthdays, who kept the family together without ever making it look like work. She was also a grandmother. Her only grandchild, Romeo, was just a toddler, the son of Andre and his long-term partner, Instagram personality Grace Piscopo. People close to Colleen would later say that becoming a grandmother had given her something new to look forward to. It wasn't just a title. It was the next chapter of a life she'd already spent raising children. Colleen kept herself active. She exercised regularly, stayed engaged in her community, and gave her time freely. The kind of woman neighbors describe as someone who was always doing something for somebody else. On the morning of the 13th of May, none of that had changed. Colleen went about an ordinary day, the kind built from small, forgettable errands. She had plans for that afternoon. She had plans, in fact, for years still ahead of her. She wouldn't get the chance to live any of them. What nobody in that family understood yet was that Colleen's final morning hadn't been left to chance at all. Somebody else had already decided how it would end, and exactly how he intended to walk away from it. Every case like this has a cast of people who thought they knew the truth. For Colleen Rebelo, that circle was small and close. Her husband, Antonio. Her children, Julian, Monique, Fabian, and her son, Andre, the one everyone would eventually be talking about. To the outside world, Andre Rebelo was easy to like, charming, confident, a young father with a successful Instagram model partner, Grace Piscopo, and a baby son named Romeo. He spoke about cryptocurrency the way other young men talked about real estate, like a path to a future nobody could question. He and Grace presented a life that looked, from a phone screen, like it had no cracks in it at all. It did, though. He'd been trading crypto for close to 3 years by the time his mother died. He hadn't made a cent. What Grace Piscopo didn't know, what she would later tell a courtroom she genuinely didn't know, was how deep their debt actually ran. Andre controlled their finances. He told her a $550,000 payday from crypto trading was coming any day. In reality, debt collectors were already circling. Combined, the couple owed more than $112,000 they had no way to pay. So the man everyone saw as a rising success was, behind closed doors, someone telling the same convincing story to everyone around him. His partner, his mother, himself. The only difference was how far he seemed willing to go to keep that story alive. The lifestyle he and Grace Piscopo presented to their followers, the home, the car, the holidays, was held up by credit and personal loans, not income. Then COVID-19 reached Australia, and whatever financial room Andre had left started disappearing with it. He didn't tell Grace how serious it had become. He didn't ask his father or his siblings for help. Instead, in the days just before his mother's death, Andre made a different decision. He quietly took out 3 life insurance policies in Colleen's name. 2 of them named him as the sole beneficiary. Combined, they were worth more than $1 million. Colleen didn't know. Grace didn't know. None of his siblings knew. To be clear, financial pressure doesn't explain what happened next. It can't. What it does explain is a timeline. A son who'd spent years failing to build the success he advertised online, arriving, within days, at a plan that ended with his own mother's death. On the morning of the 13th of May 2020, Andre drove to Colleen's home in Bicton. By his own account, given later, under oath, he stayed for a coffee and left around 11:30. Investigators would eventually reach a very different conclusion about what really happened inside that house that morning, and about exactly how long Andre Rebelo had been waiting to make it happen. This is the day everything in this case turns on. Not because of what anyone could see at the time, but because of how differently two versions of that morning would later be told. What the family believed was happening, it looked like an ordinary day. Colleen Rebelo was home in Bicton. At some point that morning, her son Andre arrived to visit, the way he often did. What Andre would later tell police, he says he stayed for a coffee. He says the two of them talked about the life insurance policies he'd taken out in her name days earlier, policies he claims she already knew about and had agreed to. He says he left around 11:30 that morning, the last time by his account that anyone saw Colleen alive. The Crown's case told a different story. Using phone data and the physical limits of the home's hot water system, prosecutors argued Andre was still inside that house well past 11:30, long enough, they said, to do what came next. Their case, that Andre used personal violence against his own mother, smothering her, and then staged her body beneath a running shower to make her death look sudden and natural. For hours, nothing seemed wrong. A running shower wasn't a warning sign to anyone. It was just Colleen, taking her time. When Fabian came home, he found his mother under the water, unresponsive. The shower had never been switched off. Paramedics and officers treated it as a sudden, natural death. No forced entry, no visible struggle. A woman who appeared to have simply collapsed. The post-mortem couldn't determine an exact cause of death. Pathologists couldn't rule out asphyxiation. But without conclusive proof, Colleen's death was recorded as undetermined. The case, for the moment, went no further. For 3 days, this was a tragedy, not yet a crime. While Julian, Monique, Fabian, and their father absorbed the loss of their mother, Andre Rebelo was already on the phone with insurance companies, filing claims on 3 policies taken out only days before her death. What the insurance company first assumed was an ordinary claim, a grieving son settling his mother's affairs. The timing didn't sit right. 3 brand new policies, a death within days of them being taken out. A beneficiary in a hurry. That employee picked up the phone and called the police. That single call is the only reason any of this came to light at all. For 3 days in May 2020, the Rebelo family grieved the way any family does. Julian, Monique, Andre, and Fabian, alongside their father Antonio, were simply mourning a mother. A funeral was being planned. Neighbors in Bicton, the kind of street where everyone had known Colleen for years, were doing what people in quiet communities do. Bringing food, checking in, saying how unfair it was that someone so generous, so present in other people's lives, was gone so suddenly. Nobody was treating this as a crime. There was no missing person report, no welfare check, no reason for alarm. Colleen Rebelo had simply been found, and the official record said her death was undetermined. Tragic, unexplained, but not suspicious. That changed with one phone call. When an insurance employee flagged Andre's claims to police, what had been a quiet family loss became something else entirely, an active investigation. Detectives who'd had no reason to look twice at Colleen's death now had every reason to. And the family who had been planning a funeral were about to be told that the manner of her death, and possibly the person responsible, was still very much in question. For Antonio Rebelo, separated from Colleen for years but still her co-parent and friend, the news landed on top of grief that hadn't even begun to settle. For Julian, Monique, and Fabian, it meant sitting with a possibility no sibling wants to consider, that the explanation for their mother's death might be sitting inside their own family. In Bicton, word moved the way it does in small communities, quickly and with disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen to a family like the Rebelos. Colleen wasn't supposed to be a case file, and whatever had happened in that house, the people who loved her most hadn't even begun to grasp how far it actually went. Once Western Australia police opened a formal investigation, they weren't just trying to understand how Colleen died. They were pulling apart everything Andre Rebelo had done in the days and weeks after. Investigators confirmed Andre had taken out 3 life insurance policies on his mother in the week before she died, naming himself sole beneficiary on 2 of them. Total exposure, more than $1.115 million. That answered the question of motive. It raised an immediate new one. How had he gotten an insurer to approve all 3 that fast, on a woman he stood to profit from losing? When examiners looked closely at what Andre had submitted to support his claim, none of it held up. A coroner's report supposedly confirming her cause of death. Fake. A medical report, attributed to Colleen's own psychologist, fake. Even her last will and testament had been altered. 3 separate forgeries. Not panic. Preparation. Andre told police he'd left his mother's home around 11:30 that morning. Investigators cross-checked that account against his own phone data. The numbers didn't line up with his story. That single contradiction became the spine of the entire case against him. Detectives turned to something almost ordinary, the home's hot water system. How long could that shower have realistically run, uninterrupted, and did it fit the version of that morning Andre had given police? Investigators argued it didn't. That same hot water system would later resurface, this time as the centerpiece of Andre's appeal, his defense arguing the numbers actually proved the opposite. Grace Piscopo, his partner of nearly a decade, told investigators she'd noticed nothing unusual. She didn't know the real size of their debt. She hadn't suspected anything, before or after. That answered one more question. Andre hadn't only deceived his mother. He'd deceived the person who shared his home and raised his son. As suspicion quietly built, Andre didn't slow down. He pushed harder, chasing the largest policy with a persistence prosecutors would later call relentless. By the 22nd of November 2022, almost 2.5 years after Colleen's death, police had enough. They arrested Andre Rebelo at his home. He was charged with murder and 4 counts of fraud. He would go on to admit the forgeries. He would never admit to killing his mother. By the time the case reached trial in October 2024, the story Andre Rebelo had told for over 4 years had already started to come apart at the seams. On the very first day, he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of fraud, admitting, in front of the court, that he had forged the documents, faked the records, and lied to an insurer to chase a payout. But on that same day, he denied the one charge that mattered most: murder. It was a hard line to hold. Because if Colleen really had known about the policies, as Andre claimed, if she'd really consented, there was no obvious reason left to explain the forged will, the fake coroner's report, the counterfeit letter from her own psychologist. Innocent men don't usually need 3 forgeries to prove a story is true. On the stand, that gap widened further. Andre admitted he had lied to police in his original statement about the morning he last saw his mother, a direct contradiction of what he'd told detectives back in 2020. And throughout the entire process, he declined a psychological evaluation, giving investigators and the court one less way to look beneath the surface of his account. Prosecutors pointed to something else too. As suspicion grew louder around him, Andre hadn't slowed down. He'd pushed harder, chasing the largest policy with a persistence that, by the Crown's account, only grew more frantic the longer he was watched. Piece by piece, the version of Andre Rebelo the jury had been asked to believe was running out of places to hide. At trial, prosecutor Brett Tooker laid out the Crown's case plainly. This was not a man who'd panicked after his mother's accidental death. It was, the prosecution argued, a calculated, cold-blooded killing, driven by debt and by Andre's need to appear successful in front of his partner, Grace Piscopo, after years of failed crypto trades and bills he'd hidden from almost everyone around him. Andre's defense told a different story. They argued Colleen may have died of natural causes, a heart condition, possibly an allergic reaction, and that she had known about and agreed to the insurance policies herself. It was the same explanation Andre had offered from the very beginning. It also still didn't explain 3 separate forgeries. After a 7-week trial in the Perth Supreme Court, a jury returned its verdict in December 2024, guilty of murder. On the 2nd of April 2025, Andre Rebelo's 29th birthday, Justice Bruno Fianacca sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before parole, backdated to the day of his arrest. In handing down the sentence, the judge described it as nothing less than the ultimate betrayal. Outside the courtroom, the people who'd loved Colleen tried to put words to what they'd lost. In a victim impact statement, family friend Leonie Randalls wrote simply, "She gave so much to her children." Andre's father, Antonio, who has continued visiting his son in prison, said only that the family still didn't fully understand what had happened to Colleen, and that the loss had reached everyone it touched. On paper, it was an ending, a guilty verdict, a life sentence, a case closed. But Andre Rebelo has since lodged an appeal, challenging the same timeline that helped convict him. For a family that lost a mother twice over, once to a killer, and once to the question of who that killer was, this story may not be finished yet. In the end, this case isn't really about cryptocurrency, or insurance fraud, or the mechanics of a forged will. It's about how easily trust can be turned into a weapon when it's handed to someone you'd never think to question. A son, sitting across the table from his own mother, deciding how to use the very love she'd given him without conditions. It's also a story shaped by image, the curated version of success an entire generation has learned to perform online, and how far one person was willing to go to protect that image, even at the cost of the one person who'd loved him the longest. But if this case is remembered for anything, it shouldn't be for the name Andre Rebelo. It should be for Colleen, a mother of 4, a grandmother to a little boy named Romeo, a woman known, by everyone who actually knew her, for her warmth and for simply showing up. She gave her family 2 decades in that home in Bicton, and she gave her children, all of them, more than most of us managed to give back in a lifetime. Her family is still living with what was taken from them. Julian, Monique, Fabian, and their father Antonio carry a loss made heavier by where it came from. And somewhere in all of it, there's a little boy who will grow up needing to understand a grandmother he barely got the chance to know. Colleen Rebelo didn't choose how her story ended, but she spent 58 years writing everything that came before it. That's the part worth remembering.